What's going on, ladies and gents? Welcome back to a brand new video. So my interim review is in 4 days, and so I'm going to take you guys through my project currently, because I don't think I've discussed anything about my project since I guess my portfolio submission back in January. And so today in this video I'm going to talk through exactly the process that I've taken to get to the point where I am at the moment. Sit back, relax and enjoy. Make sure you smash that thumbs burn and make sure to subscribe. So enjoy. So yes, the last time you guys would have seen my work would have been back in January, when I did a video of my deadline week submitting my first portfolio of my Masters of Architecture. And so as you guys would have seen at that point, I'd basically done a whole series of research around cinema, and if you want to go into more detail and want to see more about that, make sure you check out that video, because I go into some in-depth detail about the portfolio itself, so make sure you check that out. But today in this video I'm going to discuss how I've turned that research into an architectural proposal and how I've basically directly responded to that research. So to briefly describe the project, it is a film production facility that gives the independent filmmaker community an opportunity, equipment and space to be able to film and produce their own films. The internal and external space will become a backdrop for the movies, as the research from my cinema directly impacts the proposal. So the first thing that I always do before even starting to think about proposal or even starting to move forward is I write down everything that I've researched previously and basically where I want to go, or my ideas or my initial ideas of the direction I want to go into. So I usually just get a piece of tracing paper, start jotting down some diagrams, noting down some stuff, and this basically gets everything from in my head from the previous portfolio down onto paper, and I can kind of clear my head and move on from that, and then I can start kind of moving forward with the project in terms of producing an architectural proposal. So in my precedent research, Enrique Morales became really important to informing my proposal in moving forward, as his work was very relevant to the research that I produced, and the kind of geometry and the spatial realization of his project was the kind of direction that I wanted to go into. So here I've just literally produced some sketches of how he's worked with geometry and how he his ruling and his system of producing his architecture, and looking at things through section, because a lot of his work is embedded into the landscape, which is really key for my proposal, because my site is on a huge hill and I obviously wanted to integrate that hill into my proposal. So Enrique Morales and his methods of introducing the landscape into his architecture became really important. And also some of his more detailing features of his roofing systems and his shifting of planes and these kind of rotational features I really actually like, and I thought it was relevant to what I was researching, and so I wanted to introduce some kind of rotating system with roofs or some mechanics which kind of replicate this kind of theatre kind of mechanics and those kind of things. So he's got some cool stuff, and he became really prominent to my development. So now moving into the actual proposal itself, what I basically wanted to do was create a system that would give me basically structure to my program, and that would relate directly to my research from the first project. So as you guys would have seen in my first portfolio, I researched cinema and I did a series of mapping on the landscape to be able to basically analyze the movement and the terrain of the landscape, and the path that you take, the direction that you take, and also that relationship to the mast at Alexandra Palace. And so I wanted to use that system of mapping to create myself basically a rule or a system to create geometries for my building, and therefore if I can use this system, everything that I produce will be based on perspectives, based off views, because my mapping was based off that in the first place. So I wanted to maintain the landscape and my mapping as a really key feature, and I wanted the mast to be a beacon for my project. So as you can see here, I basically used the system that I created from the mapping, and I started using some of the lines to start creating some geometries, which could be patches of landscape or patches of paths or forms or spaces that could be above or below ground. And essentially I just started testing these ideas, picking out what would be more significant lines and what would be not so significant lines, and obviously once again using the mast as a beacon and playing around with different options. And then as you can see, I'm starting to create some kind of geometry. I started to really dive into the specifics of the project and basically how this system will really help the program of the building. So with it being a film studio or a film kind of production facility, where you basically go, you have meetings, you have co-working spaces where you can budget, you can plan, you can hire people, you can cast people, and then you can go into film studios, you can film independent films there, audio studios, and then eventually you can actually display your work at a film festival, which will be all hosted in this facility. So basically the whole process of producing an independent film is from start to finish will happen in my project. And so this is really important because although I'm creating geometry here, it's important to be able to facilitate these facilities and the program within the project. So what I basically started to do was to start defining some of the spaces that I needed, but I wanted to create some kind of journey for the project. So as you go through making a film, you go through a series of steps. You go from budgeting to planning to casting to hiring, etc. And then you start going into pre-production. You start kind of building things, building props. You then go into filming. And then after you go into post-production, and then you go to the marketing and displaying yourself at a film festival, etc. And so I wanted this journey to be quite explicit in my project, basically going from start to finish. And so I started to think of certain systems or things that I could start incorporating, which would basically have this path that would go through the building and these spaces that would come off that would basically go through this series of producing a film, and using the geometries from the site and basically thinking about how these spaces will link with one another. So once I'd done a whole host of sketches and diagrams and everything, and basically get my brain down onto tracing paper and developing on that initial research that I did for my portfolio 1, I then started to go into Rhino, which is a modeling software, and basically just start making things three-dimensional and basically start looking at things as space, as forms, and what could be solid and void, for example. So this is one of the first models that I produced. So as you can see, this is the series of, this is basically the system used from and created from my mapping from the landscape. And as you can see here, it's directly impacting the geometries of my proposal. And so as you guys can quite see, it looks kind of crazy here and quite wacky. But basically what I wanted was things to get more solid as it gets closer to the mast, essentially. So I wanted these trails and these series of stairs or gravel pathways, for example, to lead up to the mast and follow this geometry. So these here are basically stairs that lead up, and basically as they get closer and closer to the studio, they get more and more solid. And so these are basically embedded into the landscape, and it's probably more useful to show you in perspective here, where you can see these stairs that are built into the landscape, and these forms are basically starting to take shape. But one of the things that I basically came to realize here is that I basically just started to use this geometry too much to just fill in space and create forms and volumes from that directly, whereas I wasn't really fully designing at this point, and instead they were just blocks basically extruded from the system. And so I continued to develop them. So I zoomed in on a certain area. So these are basically the film studios here. So some are above ground, some are below ground, but majority are below ground, because with film studios you want to be able to control the lighting and the acoustics. So it made sense for them to be built underground. And as you can see here, it's quite crazy, it's quite Zaha-esque. And essentially, as you make your way through these spaces, you take yourself on a journey where the architecture and the geometry creates these points of views for you, looking over the landscape or looking up the landscape. And essentially it's a system of spaces that are controlling these viewpoints for you. And so you basically start from up here, which is where the slope is, and you enter and you make your way down through these spaces, which are basically co-working spaces where you'd be budgeting, you'd be planning, you'd be scheduling, you'd be hiring, you'd be casting, etc. And as you make your way down into the spaces, you then enter these more large-scale film studios, which are underground. You've got audio studio there, for example. These are co-working post-production spaces. And basically I just started to develop what could be film studios, what couldn't be film studios, what would be landscape, what would be underground, what would be above ground, etc. And this was just a series of models that I produced in exploring that. And so when I began to further develop the project, I had to start identifying what would be film studios, what would be indoor, outdoor film studio spaces, for example, and what would be the materiality. And so simply just from importing materials, I started just to produce some kind of visualizations of what could be stone, what could be paving, for example, what would be grass. So for example here, this is an entrance into a film studio down here, and this would be an outdoor filming space. And the reason why I chose this white stone is because it is a kind of neutral system for lighting, so it's not refracting any light or bouncing any light off, and it's a good backdrop for filming, for example. And you can also use the panorama behind you to film, which I currently haven't modeled. And essentially I thought stone would be the best material for this proposal, for this project, as I wanted it to also be kind of embedded into the landscape and it won't stick out too much. And obviously stone is a natural material. And basically, as you can see here, everything isn't fully modeled, so eventually all of the roofs will kind of have this system where it's got these zinc panels that open and close. But as you can see here, you get an idea of basically how this project is leading up to the mast, which is kind of responding to my initial research of cinema, of points of view, of mapping, etc. And essentially the whole studio becomes clear here in the space. And if you hide the floor, you can see the film studios below, which are under here. And I can also turn off the landscape, and so we can start seeing into these spaces, which at the moment is quite complex. And so I've got a long way to develop. The project is nowhere near finished. As I've mentioned previously, I've got my interim review on Monday, which is in like 4 days time. So at the moment I need to start producing drawings for this project, which is going to be really important in terms of the way I represent the drawings, represent the graphics, the experience, the journey that the people take in producing these films. And that is going to be really important to my project at the moment, because I don't really have anything that represents my project graphically, as I've currently just got a huge Rhino model, which is obviously really useful in terms of creating spaces and going into some detail about these spaces. But in terms of generating some graphics, that is my next step that I need to do. So now that I've shown you my sketches and my development work leading into a Rhino model, and now I'm going to be exporting drawings from that Rhino model, I'm going to be taking a lot of my drawings into Adobe Illustrator, and this is where Skillshare can really help you out. Yes, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. So Skillshare is an online learning community to help you guys as individuals, as creatives, to take your work to the next level. Skillshare has a whole host of classes and tutorials that will help you either as a beginner, as an intermediate or an advanced person within the creative industry, and the softwares or skills that you want to learn. In this class by Daniel Scott, Adobe Illustrator CC Essential Training would be really good for you guys if you're looking to start using Illustrator and you're new to the program. Dan covers 42 lessons in Illustrator and runs through the essentials and some examples that you guys can run alongside him. And so if you're new to the Adobe suite, definitely check out Skillshare. And the first 1,000 people to hit the link down below in the description or use my discount code Thomas Rowntree will get a 1 month free trial of Skillshare. So back to the video. So I always find that producing the drawings is the hardest part of any project, personally for me, because although I've got all these thoughts in my head and I'm kind of building and modeling through things that kind of representing my ideas, It's then quite hard to turn those things into drawings so I could graphically represent the ideas and the thoughts that's going into the project. So my projects are very three-dimensional, therefore things like a floor plan or a section show important features but doesn't necessarily describe the whole project. So I have to produce a series of different drawings and visuals and visualizations that is going to describe the project as best as I possibly can. It's all about the graphic communication and representing your ideas through the drawings. So the drawings are going to take me some time. Today is Friday, I haven't got too long left. I'm busy tomorrow, and then I've got all night Saturday night and all day Sunday, and then I've got my presentation on Monday. So I haven't got long to produce the drawings, but also remember that this is an interim review, so they don't have to be final. I don't have to have everything, but I want to get as much done as I possibly can to show the crits so I can get back as much feedback as possible. Because that's a good thing about an interim review, you can make the most of the feedback and do as much work as you possibly can to get as much feedback as possible, because you get external people questioning and also giving you feedback on your work. And the style of drawings that I want to produce are those of Brian Cantley. He's done some amazing drawing. His work is just phenomenal. I love the colour schemes, I love the harsh black and whites and greys, and also the shadows and the line work over the top of the drawings. I think this just looks amazing. So this is the kind of graphic style that I'm going for. So for example, this is one of the drawings that I've produced. This is a outdoor roof for one of my outdoor areas, and this is a roof plan of that, and this is perspective, and then this is a drawing from my proposal. But as you can see, it's just very kind of harsh black and whites, but also very simple line work, and this is the style that I'm kind of going for. And fast forward 3 days, I'm sat relaxing with a cup of tea. I had my interim review yesterday. It went pretty well. However, today I'm feeling rough, I feel knackered. As you can tell, my nose is all bunged up, I've got a bit of a head cold. I don't feel ideal, I'm run down, etc. And this is a lesson for you guys, to be prepared, plan in advance, get the work done so you don't do silly hours on the final week, because it's not healthy, it's not ideal. Fairly successful interim review. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing an update of my work, because I hadn't shown it in a while. And I hope you enjoyed me going through the process of my sketching, then going into 3D model, and then beginning to discuss and talking about drawings. However, I haven't produced final drawings yet. I'll show you the drawings kind of a bit later on when I'm coming to actually submitting the portfolio, because that's going to be really important for my portfolio. But currently I don't have any final drawings that I'm willing to show you guys yet, because they're just not quite there yet. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please smash that thumbs up button, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time. Peace.